Joining us now, former communications director Ted Cruz for president, former senior operative in the Huckabee administration in Arkansas, and also part of his presidential campaign in 2008. And now she is a very noted CNN contributor, Alice Stewart. Alice, good to have you.
Good morning, John. How are you?
Well, I was doing fine until the president sends a tweet out blowing up the chip. I mean, I spent 3 hours saying what a great idea this is and what a great opportunity for the Republicans to message it saying, you know, we want to fund children's health care. They don't. And then the president comes out with a tweet and says, it shouldn't be part of the funding program.
Yeah,
what's your comment?
It's really confusing, John. Not that we haven't been confused before, but I just really don't understand, because I thought we were well on the way to making some progress here and having Republicans and Democrats agreeing to, for the most part, a funding strategy. And then this tweet kind of throws a ratchet in the deal, suggesting that the CHIP program should be part of a long-term solution, not just a 30-day short-term extension. So I think a lot of people here in Washington are scratching their heads and going back to the drawing table on what to do, because this is something that a lot of people didn't expect. And I think, you know, talking with those on the Hill and some House Republicans, they were having a difficult time as it was, you know, with what they were going to agree on. But they pretty much agreed on the CHIP program. That the big sticking point for a lot of them, House Freedom Caucus members wanted more military funding, but the CHIP program seemed to be something that everyone agreed to. Now we're back to the drawing board based on this tweet, I assume.
You can't negotiate or get through traps this way. I mean, they had a plan. You got to stick by it. You know, there's no bigger supporter of the president and his agenda and his vision for America than I am. But that was an ill-advised tweet at 8:30 a.m., basically gumming up the works. And, I mean, I spent 3 hours saying what a great idea that was and that should be the messaging, and then you send a tweet out at 8:37 a.m. saying, it shouldn't be there. I mean, if it shouldn't have been there, that conversation should have happened Monday, not a tweet on Thursday. So
exactly, and I commend General Kelly. He spent a lot of time on the Hill yesterday talking with members of the House and congressional leaders about what they all wanted and needed, and you know, certainly his meeting with Hispanic leaders was helpful with regard to the DACA provisions, and that's how it's supposed to be done. That's how you work these last-minute deals, as you get in there and you hear from both sides and you pass that along. And based on the measure that Paul Ryan was ready to put forth, everyone had agreed to, you know, including CHIP. So this it really makes this difficult process even more difficult. And I would love to believe and have faith that this is part of the art of the deal and some long-term strategy, but it doesn't seem to make sense right now.
Well, so something happened because
I'm anxious to see what happens with this, but I do know that, you know, the House members that I've talked to, you know, it's been a difficult road to hoe. As you know, there's some deep divisions within the Republican Party, not just, you know, bipartisan differences, but, you know, as we saw with health care, we had a difficult time getting the hard, you know, the more conservative members of the GOP with the moderate wing of the GOP together, and we're trying to make consensus on this, and that, you know, the person that's slowing down the process, unfortunately, at least in this phase of the process, seems to be the president. And I think the Republicans have had a difficult challenge enough as it is coming together on their own, and this is just making it more difficult.
Well, look, he didn't just get up and decide to send this out, right? So something happened. Something went down here. We don't know what it is behind the scenes. Somebody gave him advice, because if this was an issue, this would have come up yesterday during the negotiations on the Hill. So I don't know, was it Mark Meadows? Was it the Freedom Caucus, which is, I know that he talks to Meadows 3 times a week. He's very close to him because he doesn't want to get caught in the bind he did on the first repeal and replace disaster that the Freedom Caucus basically blew up. So this came from somewhere. But I think, when you're this far down and you have a deal going, I mean, who is not in favor, really, Alice, of refunding the CHIP program? I mean, for all the entitlement programs we have, and some of them are good, some of them are wasteful, and I understand that. But the CHIP program has proved to be unbelievably effective and successful. And again, this is not Medicaid expansion for adults. This is for children of working parents who make too much money to qualify for Medicaid, too much money to qualify for the full Obama 80 or 90% subsidies, but not enough money to buy insurance for their children. I mean, that's basically what it is. So these are working people. The program has proved to be unbelievably effective and successful. So it made sense to put it in there. It's also one of the things that the Democrats have been railing against, saying, look, Republicans don't even want to refund CHIP. They took that whole thing off the table. I thought it was brilliantly done, although they screwed up the messaging. And now the president sends his tweet out, and now what the hell do you do?
Right. And who knows, we could, when they do elaborate on this tweet, the president is not in any way saying he is not a supporter of the CHIP program. He supports it being part of a long-term solution and not the stopgap spending plan. However, the stopgap spending plan is the one that's being discussed now. That's the one, that's the big issue here. And I think whether he's not aware of how this impacts the negotiations or not, it does. And yes, you could be right. It could be someone like Mark Meadows who spoke with him who has indicated, and Mark has been quite clear, that they may not have the votes on this bill because the Freedom Caucus members, who are, as you know, a significant voting bloc, and they were able to stop the health care proposal because they stuck together. They want more funding for the military, and this could be part of a strategy to go back to the drawing board and include more funding for the military in the budget process. And I could see that being part of the strategy, but it's not clear at this point because, as you know, John, you can't get the full context of what something is based on a tweet, and that's the unfortunate part of this. Is this just has a lot of people now wondering what's going on. But I will say this: with regard to the House Freedom Caucus and what they're doing, I support their desire to increase our military spending and make sure that our military is taken care of. I was at an event at the White House the other day, and it was a great speech by Heather Wilson. She's the Secretary of the Air Force, and she was pushing for more military funding and making sure that our military is taken care of. And she made a really excellent point. She said, look, the members of our military, have a duty to serve, and they're devoted to this country, and they will always step up and serve. But she stressed the problems with the low levels of readiness with our military without sufficient funding. And she said that the low levels of readiness don't affect how many will go, but how many will come back. And her point being that we need military funding to give them the necessary resources to not just train here, but to effectively execute what their mission is overseas. And that has deadly consequences if our military isn't sufficiently funded. So she made a great case for making sure that we kept the funding for our national security up. But that being said, if that's one of the holdups here, that needs to be more of a focus when we're talking about this, because right now it appears to be a holdup on the CHIP program, but if it's national security and military funding, we need to have that conversation.
Well, and you've got a day and a half, right? This thing has to get done by Friday at midnight. So, look, I'm just not in favor of gumming up a negotiation when it's already tottering on the brink anyway. So let's get the government shut down. Now that we have this new wrinkle development, I mean, it didn't look good even before this tweet came out. What happens now?
That's the key, is they will go back to the drawing board. And right now, hearing Democrats, and reading some, since this tweet came out, reading some comments from Democrats, if the chip's not in there, they don't have the support. They're not going to vote for it, and this won't pass, and we'll have a government shutdown. And that I can't say as I blame them, given that, in the effort of the negotiation process, chip was on the table, and now all of a sudden it's not. So, just when we thought that the holdup and the sticking point of these budget negotiations was going to be whether or not we provide protections for Dreamers and how we were going to work the DACA into this agreement, it turns out to be something that everyone agrees with. So I think clearly members of Congress are going to go back to the table and try to figure out what to do from here, but they clearly are not going to have the votes of the Democrats if the CHIP program is not included. So that just opens up the door for a shutdown. And I think that if that is the issue as to why we have a shutdown, then the Republicans own it.
I think so. Yeah,
if it turned out where there was not an agreement on DACA and it was the Democrats not supporting the funding bill due to DACA, then they would own it. But if this is the issue, then the Republicans own it, and I think that will be problematic.
So, Alice, we agree, and I never thought DACA should be part of the short-term funding bill because you're negotiating away all of your leverage on getting long-term legislative immigration reform, as you know. But the CHIP program, there's really nothing to negotiate here because everybody's in favor of it. So it's not like the DACA thing where you have to do amnesty, and so the president has leverage to get things for that. You have no leverage with CHIP. I mean, if you polled the Republicans in the House and Senate right now, probably 75 to 80% of them are in favor of it. So I don't see where this is even a negotiating thing that they could utilize down the road. I don't think the tweet today was helpful. How about that? No,
it wasn't. And as far as the negotiating tool, look, DACA is something that we can that deadline is not till March.
Right.
We've got time to deal with that, and we need to take time to deal with that because Republicans do have leverage in that argument. Obviously, they have certainly more power than the Democrats, but there are things that they want. CHIP, in my view, has always been a program that is something everyone can agree on, and to be honest, in Washington, if you can find common ground, you grab it and you sign off on the dotted line and you go back to your constituents and say, look, we came to an agreement on this. And that's why I don't understand why the wrench was thrown into this unless it was just to go back to the drawing board. But in my view on DACA, we have time to still negotiate on that. The Republicans, clearly we know what the president wants. If all members of Congress realize that virtually 70% of Americans want to continue protections for Dreamers. So it's in their best interest to make something happen and make that happen to satisfy the will of the people. That being said, Republicans don't want it to be protections that leads to virtually amnesty for people that are here illegally. They want to get something in return. They want to create a status for Dreamers and not give them full amnesty, and I think that is a critical component of this. But at the same time, Republicans, for the most part, agree with the president on what they want in return for protections for Dreamers. They want to have funding for the border. They want to end chain migration. They want to end the diversity visa lottery, and the key component of that is having a more merit-based immigration system. And these are things that Republicans want and need to have in exchange for a DACA deal, and they should use that as leverage with the Democrats. And part of a compromise is you got to give something to get something, and I think that's where Republicans need to realize if they're going to do this for the Democrats, then Democrats need to concede with them on some of this. Are they going to get all of the things that they want? No. But that's part of the negotiating process. And I think we may get some funding for some type of wall or fence or however we want to secure the border, but I definitely think Republicans are going to stand firm on some type of a more merit-based system as opposed to the visa lottery, which leads to often chain migration. So I think the Republicans do need to stand firm on that, and we have time to deal with it. We've got until March to work on that. But the CHIP program is something we should and could easily sign off on right now. So I don't know why we are virtually back at square one on that.
Alice Stewart, what a time. Thank you for being with us here on the John Fredericks Radio Network.